Hello. So this is the beginning of our Facebook Live about migraine and weather. So welcome to this live session. So I am streaming right now from Normandy in France. Where do you join from? UK. Hey, so we're not so far away from each other. Yeah, so in Normandy it's quite stormy as well today. It's been raining a lot. And actually, it's a bit of a four seasons in one single day. It was raining heavily 30 minutes ago, and now it's sunny again. So it's a bit strange. So for those joining us right now, so my name is Chris from Migraine Buddy. I'm a Good Days program coach, and I'm also a Migraine Buddy Expert and Migraine Buddy Plus Content Writer. So I'm streaming right now from Normandy in the northern France, just across the channel to the UK. It's 6 p.m. right here. It's been quite a funny day. We're going to talk about weather today, and it's been quite a funny day in terms of weather, with a lot of showers and as well periods of sun. So we'll see in a few minutes what kind of implications this may have. So where are you guys from? Not hesitate to comment on the page and ask any question during the live session, and I'll be answering your question on the go. So I will probably alternate talking and answering questions. Welcome everybody to this live session. I'm Chris from Migraine Buddy. I'm a Good Days coach and also a Migraine Buddy expert, and I'm also writing content for Migraine Buddy Plus. We'll be together for about 45 minutes today, and this is the first live session of this kind for Migraine Buddy. So today we will talk about weather and migraine. I hope you guys can hear me well. Do not hesitate to ask questions and to comment in the chat if there is any kind of trouble, or if you need clarification on anything I'm talking about, or if you want to ask me questions. So I'll be stopping from time to time and answer your questions. All right, so let's start. So as of today, the causes of migraine remain widely unknown to scientists. We only know that some sensitive brain receptors trigger migraine symptoms when they get upset. And they get upset when they're exposed to too much migraine risk. So they can only stand a certain level of migraine risk. And this risk level is called the migraine threshold. So when the migraine threshold is reached, brain receptors get upset and migraine symptoms appear. So to illustrate this, let's see this on a graph. So allow me a minute. All right. So on this graph, the risk is in orange, and it's measured in the vertical. So the more risk, the higher the curve. With the migraine threshold is the line curve, is the line in red. So the risk is in vertical, the migraine threshold in red. So along the day, and here it's from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., the risk varies. So it decreases from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then it increases from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And when the migraine risk reaches the threshold, symptoms appear. So in that case, symptoms appear at about 9 p.m. So let's now talk about risk factors that we commonly call triggers, although they do not trigger anything. Upset brain receptors trigger symptoms. Risk factors do not. We're exposed to multiple risk factors at once along the day, every day, and associated risk pile up. When the overall risk reaches the migraine threshold, symptoms appear. We're exposed to a variety of risk factors every day that tend to disrupt our life balance. Among others, this can be related to sleep, to diet, to hunger, to hydration, to exertion, to hormones, or to weather. So let's see on this same graph how it looks like. So on this example, you see that we have 4 types of risk related to hormones, weather changes, stress, and added sugar. Note that hormones and weather-related risks remain stable from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. that day. Stress risk decreases along the day, and added sugar risk appears at 4 p.m. and quickly increases from there. So in order to remain free of symptoms, we must stay below the threshold. Remember that the migraine threshold is the risk level that upsets the brain receptors that trigger symptoms. So how do we stay below the threshold then? There are 3 ways. The first one is to avoid risk exposure. So let's have a look at how this illustrates. So for instance, if I avoid added sugar at 4 p.m., I will stay below the threshold. So I avoid the risk, I avoid being exposed to the risk, no migraine symptoms. I stay below the threshold, no symptoms. The second way is to mitigate the risk, sorry. So for example, if I walk 30 minutes every day and I take some time to care for my loved ones and a few minutes to meditate, over time, I will build resistance to stress. So I will be less affected by stress. And how this looks like on the graph, if I'm less affected by stress, there is less risk from stress and I will stay below the threshold. Even though I have added sugar, I stay below the threshold, so no symptoms. And there is a third way. So let's go back to the initial status. There is a third way, and this third way is the other one, the only other one actually, is to raise the threshold with preventive medication. So raise the threshold, then it looks like this. Okay, so the threshold is raised, and on the graph, I see that the brain receptors, I see that I no longer have symptoms. So the brain receptors are less sensitive to migraine risk and can tolerate more risk. So the threshold is higher, no symptoms. Talk to your doctor for more information on preventive medication. Let's now have a look at sensitivity. We can have high, medium, or low sensitivity to a given risk factor. High sensitivity looks like this. So in this example, we have high sensitivity to tannins. So when we're exposed, the risk raises very sharply and very quickly and reaches the threshold. Symptoms appear. So in that case, if I'm highly sensitive to tannins, I will have symptoms for sure if I am exposed to sufficient quantity of tannins. On the other hand, if I have medium sensitivity to tannins, the risk level will raise as well significantly, but the threshold is not reached, and then symptoms won't appear. But if we happen to have repeated exposure to tannins, the risk builds up and may finally reach the threshold, and then symptoms would appear. So third case, if we have low sensitivity, even if we're exposed multiple times, symptoms will not appear if we're exposed only to tannins. But keep in mind that we're exposed to multiple risks at once. So if we were highly exposed to other risk factors while having tannins, so for example, to stress and hormones, then we may end up with symptoms anyway. So now we'll talk about weather and reported weather-related risks in Migraine Buddy. So the reported weather-related risk factors in Migraine Buddy, they are about temperature, humidity, luminosity, and barometric pressure variations. Atmospheric pressure variations or barometric pressure variations, depending on where we are, in which country we are. So it is quite difficult to avoid weather risks, but it's possible to mitigate some of them. So you can mitigate high luminosity with solar glasses or sunglasses, or even special screen glasses if you struggle with bright light from a screen or bright light from artificial lighting in a house or in a mall, for instance. If you stay home, you can also mitigate temperature variations with aircon or heating, and you can also mitigate humidity variations because both air conditioning and heating tend to dry the atmosphere, so the house atmosphere. Unfortunately, there is not much we can do about air pressure variations. So atmospheric pressure, barometric pressure, air pressure variations, all of this is the same. So now let's focus on pressure variations. So to keep it simple, high atmospheric or barometric pressure usually means high clouds in the sky and sunny weather. Low barometric pressure usually means low clouds and rain. Weather changes mean significant drop or rise of barometric pressure. So how does it translate in Migraine Buddy? So these are the figures in Migraine Buddy. I'm not going to spend too much time explaining the rationale behind this. So when we have changing weather, as I said before, the barometric pressure changes, and we can have strong variation, quick variation. So the way we measure it in Migraine Buddy is as such. High pressure variation means 0.3 inches of mercury or 10 millibar pressure variation over 24 hours. So the maximum pressure minus the minimum pressure is at least 0.3 inches of mercury or 10 millibar over a day. So it can be positive if the pressure rises, or it can be negative if the pressure falls. Then low pressure variation is less than 0.18 inches of mercury or 6 millibar pressure variation over 24 hours. And then medium pressure variation is between. So between 0.18 and 0.3 inches of mercury over 24 hours, or between 6 and 10 millibar pressure variation over 24 hours. So let's see now how it displays in Migraine Buddy. So if you use Migraine Buddy on Android, this is how it looks like. So this is how it looks like actually today, where I am in Western France, in Normandy. So just across the channel to the UK. So you can see that this morning, today the pressure is quite low, and tomorrow it will increase a lot. So I expect that the sunny weather will come back sometime tomorrow, and there will be a huge pressure variation over tomorrow. So a big rise in pressure variation. So that's for where I am, and that's going to happen tomorrow. So this is for Android. So you can access to this card straight from the home screen, and on the home screen you slide your screen to the right, and then you have the weather card. So when you tap on the pressure card, you have this pressure variation graph. So you can change your location directly from here by tapping the pin icon that is on the right, this way here, the right-hand side corner of the screen. And you can also set alerts for high or low pressures by tapping the gear icon on the screen, on the top right-hand side corner of the screen as well. On iOS, it's slightly different. Well, first, lately on iOS, we changed where you can find the weather forecast. So on the home screen of the app, you need to go to Features, and then the 2-day pressure forecast now appears in Reports. So let's have a look at that right now. So as I said, on the home screen of the app on iOS, on your iPhone or your iPad, you tap on Features, and then in the Reports tab, you can see directly the 2 days pressure forecast. So in this example, tomorrow's pressure forecast is set to be low. So low meaning the biggest variation between today and tomorrow will be less than 0.18 inches of mercury or less than 6 millibar. So if I tap on this screen, I open, as well as on Android, I open the pressure variation. So you see here the 0.18 inches of mercury or 6 millibar is the maximum difference between the low point, which is right now, and the highest point, which is the second peak over the next 24 hours. So you have it drawn in yellow, greeny color. So depending on where you live on the globe, pressure variations can be lower or greater. To make it simple, the closer you get to the poles, the more the barometric pressure varies. And the closer you get to the equator, the less the pressure variation tends to be. So let's take an example for this. So on this map, drawn by J.T. Taylor, with global data over 8 years, actual data over 8 years, the color code represents the number of days with moderate or high pressure variations per year in the US. So dark blue to dark green spots means 0 to 15%. That means about 1 out of 10 days you have moderate or high pressure variation. Light green is 15 to 30%. So that's 2 to 3 days out of 10 with moderate to high pressure variation. Light green to yellow is 30 to 40%. And orange to red is 40 to 60% of days with moderate or high pressure variation. So this is a bit extreme, but it can mean that every other day you have a moderate or high pressure variation. So if some of you are interested, we can also have a look at Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand maps. Maybe a few comments on this map. So you see here in California, in the Gulf of Mexico, you have dark blue spots, which mean that these are the places in the US where the pressure variation varies less. It doesn't mean that you don't have storms, stormy weather. It just means that the pressure variation, the pressure tends to be more stable, let's call it like this. So pressure changes are not so big. And what can be an issue if you're sensitive to pressure variations are actual big variations, so moderate to high variations. So the northern you go, you travel in the United States, the darker it gets. So first, in the Midwest, you see, and in Colorado, Arizona, you see that you tend to have dark green, and then you have light green to yellow. The more northern you get. So in the New England states, you have a lot more of these light green color. And then in the closer you get to Canada, the more yellow it gets. So actually, when people tend to suffer from weather changes, the big trigger here, the big risk factor here, the big sensitivity comes from high pressure variation. So if you are in Iowa or Nebraska, or if you live in Canada, you will, but unfortunately, be much more subject to, you will be much more exposed to high pressure variation. So, for instance, let's have a look at other parts of the world. If I look at Western Europe, so here you see UK, here you see Ireland, you see the northern part of France, you see Western Europe, Denmark, the south of Sweden, Norway, Baltic states, Poland, and all of these countries, everywhere it's light green to very light green and turns to yellow in Scotland, for instance, or in Norway. So again, the closer you get to the Arctic regions, the more pressure tends to vary. So as you saw on my Migraine Buddy screenshot, I'm in the northern part of France, and tomorrow there will be a big variation. If I follow what's the trend that is on this map, such variation may happen like 2 or 3 times every 10 days in France. So like maybe once a week or something like that. But if I travel to if I travel to the north of Scotland, maybe it's twice as much, like twice a week or something like this. So now if I have a look at how it looks like in Australia and New Zealand, so you see that, well, as we are in the southern hemisphere, then in the north part of Australia, in Fiji, in New Caledonia, in Samoa Islands, all of these parts of all of these regions have very, very small pressure variations along the year. So it very seldom happens that pressure varies a lot. But then if you go to the southern coast of Australia, then it becomes more frequent. If you go to Melbourne, if you go to Sydney, and even more, and the northern island of New Zealand, then it becomes more frequent. And then if you go to Tasmania and the southern island of New Zealand, it's even more frequent. So remember the color code. Maybe in Melbourne, Sydney, in Auckland, you will have like maybe once a week moderate to high pressure variation, and in Hobart or Christchurch, it will be maybe twice a week on average. Oh, I can see that I have some questions about the map. So we can probably put the map. Well, the map will be available actually in one of the forthcoming programs, and maybe we can ask Jenny to share it on her Facebook page or something. So we will see what we can do with this. So if some of you know, we at Migraine Buddy were actually lucky enough to be based in Singapore, where it can be rainy like every day, but apparently the weather, the pressure variation doesn't change so much, and we can see that every day on our app on Migraine Buddy. We very seldom get alerts of high pressure variations in Singapore. So let's see if we have more questions, and then we'll switch to the next part. So in spring and summer, I see more variations in the south. Yes, okay. So these maps, they show the average, the yearly average over 8 years. So actually, it's clearly possible that there are more variations in spring and summer, and there are less variations in autumn and winter. This is not like a weekly average; it's a yearly average. So there can actually be strong changes over the year, but on average, this is what we can see. So on average, it's much more likely to have frequent high pressure variations the closer you get to the poles. So in the northern hemisphere, the further north you travel, the more likely you get high pressure variations on average. And this is true for about everywhere in the world. And for instance, I notice here in the north of Italy, this is clearly, definitely true. Let's have a look again at the Western Europe map. So in the bottom of this map, we have Switzerland and the very north of Lombardia. So I guess the north of Italy is much more like this. It's probably very equivalent to this. And again, there can be seasonal variations, but on average, you can expect in the north of Italy to have something like 15 to 20% of days with moderate to high pressure variations. So this map was drawn by the data collection from JT Taylor, and it's actually available on the internet. Oh, I see more questions coming. Correlation between latitude and pressure variation. So yes, so this is this is what we can see with the measures. It's not 100% true, because if you have a look at the US map, for instance, you see that in the northern, if you are in the northern part of the US, if you are in the East Coast, for instance, you see that you have light green. And if you go to the center of the US, like in the Rocky Mountains, you're much more likely to have, for the same latitude, you're much more likely to have yellowish, so even more pressure variations here. So on average, yes, on average, latitude plays a big role, but there can be regional variations as well. So how to measure your exposure to pressure variations? Pressure forecast is in the app, and it's everywhere on TV, on newspaper, on internet. But you cannot find pressure variations history hardly anywhere. So this is why Migraine Buddy decided to source this information and include it to Migraine Buddy Plus. So on the one hand, you will receive monthly weather reports. So for your main location, they show you the actual pressure variations over the past month together with your attack records. Okay, so this is how the report looks like. So you see here you have 1 month of data, and you see the curve. This is the pressure variation over 1 month for my main location. And I've added a red cross for each high or moderate pressure change. And the pink stripe is an attack record. So for this month, there is only one attack record. So if I zoom on this one, so of course, I will first need to check whether I was at home when these steep changes took place. And if I was, I can say for sure that I am not highly sensitive to weather changes. If I were sensitive to high pressure, if I were highly sensitive to pressure changes, then I would have an attack each time. And looking at the map, watching the graph here, watching the curve, each cross here, after each cross, I didn't have an attack. And this is a very good news. This means that I am not highly sensitive to moderate or high pressure changes. So remember, high sensitivity, remember what we saw before on the high sensitivity graph? High sensitivity means that I have symptoms for each exposure. And if I do have an attack for each big variation, if I had an attack after each big variation on this graph, then I would have a look at other monthly graph. I would take, for instance, the last 6 months, my last 6 monthly report, and I would check for each of them. And then if I happen not to have an attack after only one of these big variations, then I am surely not highly sensitive. And this is a very good news. Okay, so I see a question here. If I've not signed up to Migraine Buddy Plus, would I be able to do so and access retrospective reports for pressure and attacks? No, you would not. You would receive the last month, and then you would receive consecutive months. So every month you receive the past month. So if you sign now, you will receive your June. You may receive your May reports, but more surely you will receive your June reports at the beginning of July. And then at the beginning of August, you will receive your July reports. Actually, when you sign up to Migraine Buddy Plus, within 2 days or something like that, you receive the past month. So if you sign up today, you will receive within 2 days your May weather reports. in your mailbox. So you receive this as a PDF in your email box. Now let's see the second feature. So this is the monthly weather report, and then besides, in order to check my actual exposure to weather changes before each attack and avoid relying on my intuition, we have added the prior 24-hour pressure change information to each attack. So here, on your attack, here I have the pressure history. So here it says low pressure variation 24 hours before your attack. So you can check this, and if you happen to have a moderate or high pressure variation there, you can add it to the trigger screen. So this is the only objective way to measure your exposure to pressure variations. If pressure variations appear consistently as a top 3 trigger in your trigger report, in your in-app reports, if they are consistently in your top 3 trigger, and then you may want to take action. So how can you take action? If you are highly sensitive, you may talk to your doctor to see how you can raise your threshold with preventive medication. And you might also want to take extreme measures and consider moving closer to the equator, because these are the only 2 ways that you can reduce your exposure. So if you are not highly sensitive, then you can mitigate your exposure to other risk factors in order to stay below the threshold. This is where pressure forecast is important to plan ahead. So we have questions now. Even the sensitivity to pressure change is low, but we have other risk factors have increased. Stress, strong pressure could trigger an attack. Yes, it could. Yes. This is why it is very This is why it's very important to work on your other risk factors to mitigate as much as possible the overall risk, to take the overall risk as down as much as possible, so that you can avoid symptoms. So I have a question about altitude. So altitude does affect pressure patterns, because the higher you get, the higher the altitude, the lower the barometric pressure. So this is why you have such high variations when you take the plane, because when you take the plane, pressurization in the plane mimics high altitude, like being in the mountains. So there again, the pressure variation in altitude tends to vary the same way it varies when you are at sea level, but maybe it doesn't vary the same way. But one thing is sure is that when you drive uphill or downhill, the pressure variation will change, and rather quickly. Let's see now. So we said that if you're not highly sensitive, you can mitigate your exposure to other risk factors in order to stay below the threshold. And this is where it's very important to forecast, to see the pressure forecast and to plan ahead. So in order to give you more visibility, on top of the 2-day forecast that is available to everyone, we've also sourced a 7-day pressure forecast and added it to Migraine Buddy Plus. So this is how it looks like. So it's already available on iOS on your home screen, as you can see here, and it will be soon available on Android too. So this can help you plan your social activities and also avoid risky activities such as long drives if high pressure variations are forecast. And last but not least, since we cannot mitigate pressure variations, we need to focus on as many other risk factors as possible. So as we said before, when we have strong weather changes loom, do make sure to avoid your dietary triggers, to stay well hydrated, to practice your anti-stress activities, to avoid hunger, to avoid physical exertion, to wear your solar glasses, and so on. This is very important. All right, so I guess we've already gone a bit past the 45 minutes we promised at the beginning. Please feel free to ask a few more questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. And anyway, thank you very much for following this live session. Okay, to everyone that has joined today, before answering your last questions, if you have any. As a token of appreciation for joining our first webinar, we would like to offer everyone who's watching this live a special $20 discount off Migraine Buddy Plus annual subscription, and a special 20% discount off our Good Days Coaching Plus, our Good Days coaching plans. So we'd also just like you to fill in your feedback for this webinar in the Typeform link that will be in this chat, and you'll be able to receive the discount code. And I'll ask Jenny to leave the link in the comments, so it will be available soon after the webinar ends, I guess, for you guys to access it. So, and also, if an annual plan sounds like too much commitment at this time, do remember that you can also try MBplus free for 7 days. And the link for the trial will also be in the comments as well. All right, so one more question here about the pressure. The lower the pressure, the less likely the trigger. Okay, so the risk comes with pressure variation. So the more the pressure variation, the more quantity of risk I would say we have. And then the higher the higher the sensitivity, the quicker we have a risk of getting the symptoms. So indeed, if we have low pressure variation, then we're exposed to less risk. And then the sensitivity applies like a multiplier. If we have that quantity of pressure variation, but we are moderately sensitive to it, then the risk might look like this. But if we have low sensitivity, then it will be low risk anyway. So indeed, it's together the quantity of variation and how sensitive we are to it. So if you feel that you are sensitive, or if you've noticed time after time that in your top 3 triggers you see moderate or high pressure changes, then you're probably sensitive to pressure variations. And in that case, whenever a high pressure variation looms, then focus on mitigating every other risk factors of yours. All right, so thank you very much, everybody. I think we're going to wrap up for tonight, or for today, actually, if you are in Northern America. And I hope you enjoyed this first webinar, and we hope to see you soon on Migraine Buddy. Thank you very much, everybody, and we wish you a very nice weekend.